Now that Black Phone 2 has been out for a weekend, we're going to talk all the spoilers, all the things that I really liked about the movie, and the one big thing I didn't like. I have a spoiler-free review if you want to check that out, but in summation, I enjoyed this one maybe a little bit more than the first one. I didn't love the first one, but I did really enjoy it, and this one was a solid follow-up. It's one that I was skeptical about. I didn't know if they really needed a sequel, but the direction they went in, this very Freddy Krueger-inspired tone for the grabber and everything they did with the characters, I actually ended up really liking, and so I would rate this one a bit higher than the first because it kind of expands things out. Bigger and a little bit more unpredictable. We're in a new setting. The grabber is this more ominous, overarching presence, and I like what they did with it. People who are more passionate about the first one might not have liked this one quite as much. I've seen a lot of mixed reactions. Some people saying it's better, some people saying it's not as good, but hey, it's interesting to talk about, so we're going to go into detail about all the things that I want to spoil. So let's start with where our main characters are in their lives now, a few years after the incident with the grabber. Everybody knows what happened, obviously. We're introduced to Finney beating the shit out of a kid, apparently a new kid, who came up to him and said, like, "Oh yeah, you don't seem so tough." And he showed him that he was, mirroring the fight at the beginning of the first film that Robin had, where he beat up that one guy. Finney even says the same line about how you gotta make him bleed to put on a good show or show him who's boss or whatever. And we see that Finney is really trying to make himself feel tough. And immediately to me, this seemed kind of like him trying to ensure himself that nothing like that would ever happen to him again. Like, he wanted to make sure that he was the detached, strong guy because facing what happened to him was too difficult. And as the movie goes on, we see that he's smoking weed all the time. He's ignoring a lot of these things that Gwen tells him, like she's sleepwalking, having these horrible nightmares, and he wakes her up. He helps her how he can, but there's that one scene where he wakes her up and she says, "I had a bad dream." He starts to walk away and tell her, "Go back to bed." And she's like, "Finney, I had a bad dream." Like, she's really trying to say, "Can you comfort me? You're my big brother. I need your help." And he just says, "Go back to bed." And he keeps walking away. He doesn't want anything to do with it. There are several instances where he walks by phones that are ringing and he knows that it's not a person on the other end. And he just picks them up. He says, "I can't help you." And he hangs back up. He's trying to distance himself from what happened, the same way their father did. Their father didn't want to acknowledge the supernatural aspects of his family. He lost himself in alcohol, and Finney is kind of trying to do the same thing because it traumatized him. He doesn't like to think about him. It scares him all the time, and I really like the way that was done. There are so many horror movies that focus on trauma, but this one handled it in a way that made complete sense with the events of the first movie. And then you have Gwen, who is just haunted, terrorized by these nightmares, by all the things that are happening to her in these dreams that end up also happening to her in real life, Freddy style. She's basically the main character. They both have a lot of focus. They're kind of co-leads, and I really like that. I like how they're together for this film where they were separate in the first one. But if I had to pick one who's more important, it really is her, and I think that's cool. They're both great. They were really good in the first one. They're fantastic here. Her being the one to drive so much of the plot makes sense because she's the one with the stronger psychic abilities, and now that the grabber is supernatural, it makes sense. And also, he's targeting her because he's specifically mad at Finney, and he wants to take away the things Finney loves. She's having these intense visions. She's worried that she's gonna go crazy like their mother did, and some of the emotional scenes between them were great. Like when their dad arrives at the camp, and they finally have that shouting match where she's talking to Finn about how he's detached himself, and he finally opens up. He's like, "Yeah, I know that. I think about it all the time, and it scares the shit out of me." And their dad finally has to come to terms with it. He can't run away from it anymore. Just great acting all around. Mason Thames was great, and Madeleine McGraw, just so many standout moments where she had to show emotion, and she absolutely nailed it. So while the first movie was self-contained very well, and I like what they did with those characters in that movie, and you didn't need another one, they do enough to follow up with these characters in this one that I did find it really enjoyable, and I am glad they made it. Now we get into the shit that really excited me when I saw the trailer, when I finally got on board with the idea of them making this sequel. when the realization hit that they were going Nightmare on Elm Street with it. Absolutely. Hell yeah. We haven't actually had one of those in forever for some reason, and so just give me whatever you can. I love the way they do it, the Super 8 grainy shooting style of these sequences, how we always see the grabber. I thought that was really atmospheric, really cool. I understand that it is very similar to Freddy Krueger. Some people might have an issue with that, but I've just been deprived of it for so long, and I think there are enough differences. The rules work a little bit differently here. One of the biggest ones that I really like is how the grabber can interact with other people through Gwen's dream. He's not just in the dream, her dreams manifest him. So even if other people can't see him, he can interact with them and he can kill them. So I thought that was really cool. You have some scenes like when he's showing her the past, but other than that, the dreams usually take place in the location Gwen is at. So it does set it apart from Freddy a little bit because it feels like the grabber is just actually there, more like he's just this invisible, intangible menace until the end when they figure out how to get one over on him, which also felt very Nightmare on Elm Street when Gwen realizes, oh, I have power in the dream too, but how else are you gonna do it? You're gonna turn the killer supernatural, which you have to do in order for this sequel to work. There's only so many ways you can take it. Considering what they had to work with, what was established in the first film, I think this was a really cool way to do it. Another similarity is that he feeds off of fear, but rather than feeding off the fear of the living, he actually feeds off the fear of the dead. The boys that he initially killed, whose bodies were never discovered, their killings were never linked to the grabber. We need to find their bodies and put them to rest so their souls can move on, and until that happens, their fear is keeping the grabber grounded here as well and allowing him to continue tormenting Gwen and Finney. And that's one reason I don't really think they could make a third one. I don't think they should. I was skeptical about this one, and I ended up liking it, so if they do, I'll be there. But I feel like you have to know when to quit. This one already pushed it a little bit too far, which I'll get into later. I don't think you should try to push it too much, because what are you going to do for a third one? There are other victims whose bodies also weren't found, and they also allow the grabber to still be here. Or you could just make shit up. You can say his hatred is so intense that it's grounding his spirit here on Earth. Anything you want, you can make shit up. But I feel like we killed him as a human, now we beat him as a ghost. That's kind of it. I don't think there's enough variety like there is with Freddy Krueger to where you can make movie after movie after movie. This is probably where you should stop. Unless they try to continue the story of Finney and Gwen without the grabber and they just do other supernatural shit instead, but I don't really think that would work. I don't think people would want that. And then the other option would be like a prequel, but I don't want that either. One thing I really liked about the first movie is that we don't get a lot of exposition or flashbacks or anything like that about the grabber. We can understand him just by the way he acts. A lot of the things he does and says give us some insight into what his life was probably like and how he got so twisted, and that's really enough. And I'm really glad that this movie doesn't ruin the mystique. It doesn't show us his childhood. The only things we learn about him are the few small things that are necessary for this story. He worked at this camp and he liked to ice skate, and that's about it. They did not push it too far at all, and the more you make, the more you risk taking it too far. But in this movie, I really like the way he was portrayed. I like these dream sequences. A lot of them were very brutal, more so than the first one. At the very beginning of the movie, we see kids getting chopped up, and the fact that it's shot in this grainy quality just makes it feel all the more real. And the first time he really attacks Gwen, making her float and slamming her into shit and almost throwing her into the furnace, that was intense, that was crazy, and I love that everybody saw it. We did not have to waste any time dragging it out with them not believing her. Everybody saw it, and they all immediately knew there's no natural explanation for this. You have to deal with the crazy Christian lady who was kind of a dick, and she's like, that kid's got the demon in her, and it's like, all right, bitch, whatever. But that was also satisfying because Gwen got to give her some great comebacks. Just fantastic. Some good laughs as a result of that character being a douche. The type of character you'd think might be fodder in a movie like this, the character you dislike so you can enjoy them dying later, but there's no actual body count in the movie at all. It is kind of weird to me, but it didn't really bother me in the moment. I don't know if I really have a problem with it. I mean, it would have been cool if we actually got to see Dream Grabber just actually tearing a couple people apart. That probably would have been enjoyable. You know, in the end of the movie, he's cutting them, he slams her head down on the ice, he's dragging the one guy around, but nobody actually ends up dying, and the only deaths were in the past. It's not a huge deal, but I think it would have been cool to see a little bit more of what he could accomplish in this new form. Now, to get into the big things that did hold the movie back for me, I mentioned in my review that the plot ended up being more simple than I thought it would be. It takes quite a while for the grabber to properly be introduced in the movie, and because of all that buildup and all this mystery, we've got these letters being carved in the ice by ghost children, WBH. We gotta go to this camp. Their mom used to work there. She's talking to Gwen across time. We're leading towards some kind of a reveal. What's the reveal? WBH stands for Wild Bill Hickok, which is the name that the grabber went by when he worked at the camp. And the grabber killed the kids. That's it? The reveal is that the grabber killed kids? If you want to compare that to Nightmare on Elm Street, you'd have to compare it to the remake, when the big reveal at the end is Freddy Krueger was evil the whole time. You don't say. So that was odd. It felt like they could have done more with that. I don't know what I would have wanted them to do. I was wondering, are they going to reveal that he had a partner or something like that? Even when he started showing Gwen the visions of him with their mom, and you have Dream him and also real life past him, who didn't look like Ethan Hawke. I don't know if that was him. I don't think so. That confused me for a second. I was like, are they gonna say that he had a partner or something? But no, that's not the case at all. There's really no actual reveal about any of that, and that was disappointing. Again, I don't know what I would have actually liked to happen. I don't think him having a partner is a good idea. I don't want to learn too much about his past. But it's the fact that they're building up what seems to be a mystery. We've got letters being inscribed. What do they stand for? If you're gonna build up to it, you gotta build up to something. And they do. There is a twist in the movie, but it's one that I don't actually like. The movie opens with Finney and Gwen's mother. We see her at the camp. We know from the first movie that she had psychic powers as well. They eventually drove her crazy. She ended up taking her own life. In this movie, she's communicating with Gwen over the phone. We learn that the grabber and her both worked at this camp at the same time. I'm fine with all of that. You're giving us a little bit more information. I don't think it's really affecting anything from the first movie too badly. I'm okay with it. Even when we learn that the mom was having visions about the grabber's victims, you're starting to push it, but Gwen was also having those exact same visions, so sure, makes sense still. Where they take it too far is when we get the reveal that their mother did not commit suicide, and it was actually the grabber who killed her and made it look like she did. No, not a fan. I don't like retconning the first movie, things that clearly were not planned. It just is very hard to buy into unless you do it extremely well, and I just didn't buy it. Every time they talked about it in this movie, I was like, no, I'm just not feeling that change. It's making a connection where there didn't need to be one. It makes the world feel smaller, where the first movie works really well as a self-contained story. Finney is just one of the boys that he happened to abduct, but now he's actually connected to the woman who almost caught him, and he killed her, and there's just no need. it makes everything feel smaller, which I think is the opposite of what they wanted. I think they were trying to expand the lore in the story, and it just kind of has the opposite effect. It's just very hard to buy into. I don't like the way it affects the story of the first film. It does serve a purpose in the story, several purposes actually, which make it not as bad as it could have been. The first thing is that it motivates Finney and the dad when they're having that big emotional argument. Gwen tells them the truth about what happened to the mom, and that kind of gets them to get ready for the climax, for the big battle. I think that could have been accomplished in another way. I think you could have had this nice cathartic moment between family with the three of them and have Finney decide to face these fears and the dad as well, just because they care about Gwen and they can see how much she's suffering and struggling, and I think you could have had that work perfectly fine, even without this idea being introduced. You know, these are the characters who were in the first movie, Finney and Gwen, that we got attached to, and their father, who we absolutely hated at the time, but has gone on an arc that I actually really appreciate. We only briefly heard about the mom, so centering the emotional catharsis on the living characters, the ones that we really know the best, I think would have been better. The other purpose of this reveal is for one of the final scenes in the movie, a scene that I really liked, and it was some of the best acting from Madeleine McGraw when she is on the phone with her mother, and she's telling her everything is okay, and she's there with Robin, and this power is a gift and not a curse. Madeleine was just so good in that scene, and I actually got a little teary-eyed. I was like, you know what? I don't even like the plot line that got us here, and yet these individual scenes are executed really well. I really care about the characters, and the performances are so good. So because those scenes work so well, this plot line isn't as bad as it could have been, but I'm still not a fan of it. I still think you could have gotten here in another way. If you had kept it so that she actually did kill herself, you could have had that scene at the end still happen. There just would have been a more somber tone to it, which they didn't want. But I think it could have worked if you had that extra somber quality to their exchange, where the mom is basically saying everything that she says to her, but also like, I'm sorry for leaving you behind. I don't think that would have been much of a problem. I think that could have been okay. And we would just be assured that Gwen would have the support system of Finney and Ernesto, who I have yet to mention, but he was also there, and the dad, and that she would be able to share with them and get help from them and be able to overcome the issues that her mom couldn't. I think it could have worked without the retcon. So that was definitely the biggest issue for me. A lot of the story felt too simplistic. It felt like we were building to something that ended up not being much, and the one big surprise was a surprise that I didn't actually like. But luckily you have these characters, performances, the setting, the visuals, Scott Derrickson's direction. I really liked all of that. There was that scene in the phone booth where he's spinning the camera around it back and forth, and every time it turns back, we see like one of the ghost kids who wasn't there before. That was one of my favorite shots. I just really like the cold, I like the grabber's new abilities, just the Super 8 quality of all the dream sequences, how much of a threat he felt like. There was a lot here to like, even if there's a major plot decision that I disagree with. And I think that about covers it. If there's anything else, let me know down in the comments. Leave your thoughts on every little thing Black Phone 2 related, whether you agree or disagree, if you liked the twist with the mom, if you wanted more out of the story, what you thought about the character development. Do you want a third one? Do you have any good ideas for how they could make a third one work? Maybe you could change my mind. But thank you for listening to me ramble for all this time. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more from me. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time.